I hope you'll come for each particular lecture because they all go in succession, one with the next. And if you miss one, you might not understand what's coming the following night. So I'm going to ask you, if possible, to try to be here each night. Try to tune in each night and watch each and every lecture. And, this is, we've been doing this since 2012. And the reason why is because we want to get the gospel message preached to people. We want people to be able to open their Bible and understand it. And by the time that we're through with this series, even after tonight, I'm hoping that it'll lay a bit of a foundation for you that when you open the Bible and you read certain prophecies, that you'll notice if you keep reading, many times it will explain itself to you. And some of the things we're going to cover tonight will also help you to be able to decipher certain prophecies. So to get started, we're going to be talking about the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation. We're going to be focusing on specific chapters in those Bibles of the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation. So to begin, let's just look at a few slides together just to lay a little bit of a foundation. Many people aren't aware of it, but a full 30% of the Bible is prophecy. And in order to really be able to understand prophecy, particularly the book of Revelation, which we're going to be looking at tomorrow night for quite a while, and the following night, you really have to understand the Bible as a whole. A lot of people don't realize that when we look at the book of Revelation, how much of it comes from the Old Testament. I've had a lot of people, a lot of Christians will say to me, well, I'm a New Testament Christian. And it always stumps me when they say that because I'm thinking, what is a New Testament Christian? Because the Bible says all Scripture is inspired of God. So we have to take the whole thing. And if we don't understand the Old Testament, then the New Testament cannot properly be understood because they go hand in hand, as you will see throughout this series. It's amazing how these things happen. So why is it important to know the rest of the Bible before we study Revelation or a book like Daniel? Well, here's why. Revelation has 404 verses on the PowerPoint, and more than 270 of those 404 verses are taken directly from the Old Testament. So how can I understand the book of Revelation unless I have a foundation in the Old Testament? So this is why when people say, I'm a New Testament Christian, I always think, well, how can that be when 67% of Revelation comes from the Old Testament? Not only that, but if you stop and think about it, Jesus never quoted the New Testament. He only quoted the Old Testament because the New Testament hadn't been written yet. So he knew and understood the Old Testament, which points to everything that we see in the New Testament. And how would we know that those prophecies are being fulfilled that we see in the New Testament unless we read it from the Old Testament? All of the signs that Jesus gave came from the things that are taught in the Old Testament, and he just laid it down, and then we see what is taking place even now. So the next thing, you can't understand Revelation without understanding the book of Daniel. They go hand in hand. So many people say, oh, I want to read the book of Revelation. I recommend that. Yes, by all means, read the book of Revelation. Even if you haven't read other books of the Bible, it doesn't hurt to read it. You might be a little confused, but Daniel and Revelation go hand in glove, as you will see tonight, tomorrow, and Wednesday night especially. And also, one of the ways that we like to study here at this ministry is found in Isaiah chapter 28, verses 9 and 10. For precept must be upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line, line upon line, here a little, there a little. So we have to take the Bible as a whole. We can't isolate one verse and build our whole doctrine on that verse. We have to lay them down side by side and compare the Bible as we go. So having laid that down and talked about this a little bit, let's dive right in. We're not going to waste any time this evening. We're going to cut right to the chase. Let's open our Bibles to the book of Daniel, chapter 2. Now, there's a pew Bible in front of you. I believe the one on your left, one of them is a King James and the other one is a New King James. And you will see there in this slide, you will see the page number of where you have to be if you're not familiar with where to find that. So when we think about this book of Daniel, just a little bit, just to give you a little bit of history about this particular book, this prophecy that we're about to read was written about 2,600 years ago. And you say, well, what good is that to me? Well, this was written by Daniel, and some of it was written, believe it or not, by Nebuchadnezzar, if you look at one of the chapters in particular, chapter 4. And it was written in Babylon, and the people of God have been consistently disobedient to God. This is one of the problems that we all have. We disobey. And this was no different back then. God's people, the people that he chose back then to be his people, had been very disobedient. They were breaking his laws. And God pled with them, and he rebuked them. And he actually, over time, he allowed them to come under siege by this king named Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was the king of Babylon, and he went and seized Jerusalem, and he took them captivity. And he took all of their best students, the smartest people, especially the children. He was very interested in getting the young people and indoctrinating them in the ways of Babylon. And they trekked some 600 miles across the desert, and he brainwashed them in the schooling of the Babylonians. So he took these Israelite or Jewish boys, and he was trying to teach them false doctrine. The name Daniel, he was a young man when this happened. Daniel was one of these people that was held captive, that was taken captive as a boy. And the name Daniel means, it's actually two words, Dan, which means judge, and El, which is a shortened form of Elohim, which means God. So the word Daniel, or the name Daniel, means God alone is my judge. If you look that up, you'll find that in the Hebrew. And what King Nebuchadnezzar did was he changed Daniel's name. The name his parents gave him was Daniel, but the king changed his name to Belteshazzar, which was actually a pagan name, and it was a false god. And we only find that name Belteshazzar when applied to Daniel 10 times in Scripture. But this is a Babylonian god, and the name Daniel is used 76 times in the book of Daniel alone. So let's begin. That's just a little foundation on the book of Daniel on what was taking place at the time. So here we're going to pick up in chapter 2 of Daniel, and notice what this says. Now this king, Nebuchadnezzar, is the one that took them captive. Excuse me, just a moment. I'm struggling with allergies, so I apologize if my voice gets a little funny and I have to clear my throat from time to time. So let's read through this. Daniel chapter 2, beginning in verse 1. Now in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was so troubled that his sleep left him. Then the king gave the command to call the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dream. So they came and stood before the king. And the king said to them, I have had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to know the dream. Then the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will give you the interpretation. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, My decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me and its interpretation, you shall be cut into pieces, and your houses shall be made an ash heap. However, if you tell the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts, rewards, and great honor. Therefore, tell me the dream and its interpretation. They answered again and said, Let the king tell his servant the dream, and we will give its interpretation. So let's pause here for a moment. What's going on is the king has a dream, and he can't remember the dream. So he goes to his Babylonian magicians and astrologers and soothsayers, and he says, I want you to tell me the dream, and I want you to interpret the dream for me. And they're saying, tell you the dream? This was in your head. Give us the dream, and then we'll give you the interpretation. And he's saying, no, I can't remember it. I want the dream and the interpretation. Let's keep reading. We'll see what happens here. Verse 8. The king answered and said, I know for certain that you would gain time, because you see that my decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me, there is only one decree for you. For you have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me till the time has changed. Therefore, tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can give me its interpretation." The Chaldeans answered the king and said, "There is not a man on earth who can tell the king's matter. Therefore, no king, lord, or ruler has ever asked such things of any magician, astrologer, or Chaldean. It is a difficult thing that the king requests, and there is no other who can tell it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh." For this reason, the king was angry and very furious, and gave the command to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree went out, and they began killing the wise men, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. So you see what's going on here. The king wants the dream and its interpretation. They're saying, if you tell us what you dreamed, we can give you an interpretation, but you're asking something that's impossible. We can't get in your head. We can't tell you what's on your mind. We can't tell you what you dreamed. And the king is wise. He says here, I know that you're stalling. You're trying to make up a story. And he realizes that if he tells them something, they're going to make something up. And he says, but if you can tell me what I dreamed, now I know you can tell me the interpretation. Well, they said, that's impossible, except for the gods whose dwelling is not with men. So let's continue to read here. Remember what he says there in verse 13. The decree went out, and they began killing the wise men, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. Now keep in mind, Daniel at this time is probably in his late teens. He might be 18, 19, maybe 20, to our best calculations. He was a very young man. He was taken captive when he was a boy. So he was young. I apologize for my allergies again. Verse 14. Let's pick up here in verse 14. It says, "Then with counsel and wisdom Daniel answered Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, 'Why is the decree from the king so urgent?' Then Arioch made the decision known to Daniel. So Daniel went in and asked the king to give him time, that he might tell the king the interpretation. So Arioch comes to Daniel, and he knocks on his door, and he gets Daniel up, and he says, 'Look, I'm here to kill you,' basically is what he's telling him. And Daniel says, 'Well, hold on a minute. Take me to the king.' So he takes him to the king. And let's pick up in verse 17. Then Daniel went to his house and made the decision known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions. Now, these names might sound different to you, but I'm sure you've heard the Bible account of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These three Hebrews, we're going to read about them later in the week. We're going to look at that account. So when you see Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, Hananiah is Shadrach, Mishael is Meshach, and Azariah is Abednego. These are three Hebrew boys, and they were Daniel's friends. So Daniel comes to them here in verse 17, and here's what he says in verse 18. Here's what it says. He comes to his companions that they might seek the mercies from the God of heaven concerning this secret. In other words, the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, so that Daniel and his companions might not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. So this king means business. He says, if you can't tell me the dream and its interpretation, it's off with your head. You're going to die. Verse 19. So it says, then the secret was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. So Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel answered and said, blessed, this is verse 20, blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his, and he changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and raises up kings. This is very important. We're going to talk about this later in the week. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and secret things. He knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank you and praise you, O God of my fathers. You have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we ask you. For you have made known to us the king's demand. So Daniel and his three Hebrew friends prayed, and what happens? God answers the prayer. He gives Daniel the dream. Well, let's pick it up in verse 24 and see what happens. Therefore, Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. And he went and said thus to him, do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. So he's trying to put a stop to everybody else being killed. He said, stop it. Just don't destroy them. Take me before the king, and I will tell the king the interpretation. Then Arioch quickly brought Daniel before the king and said this to him, I have found a man of the captives of Judah who will make known to the king the interpretation. Seems like Arioch's taking a little credit there. Daniel came to him and told him he had the dream. Verse 26, the king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation? So remember, there's two things that the king wanted. Daniel has to tell him what he dreamed, and then he has to interpret the dream. So imagine this setting. Verse 27, Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, the secret which the king has demanded, the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, and the soothsayers cannot declare to the king. But there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dream and the visions of your head upon your bed were these. So here, Daniel's addressing the king. He's about to tell him the dream. And here it is, verse 29. As for you, O king, thoughts came to your mind while you were on your bed about what would come to pass after this. And he who reveals secrets has made known to you what will be. But as for me, this secret has not been revealed to me because I have more wisdom than anyone living, but for our sakes who make known the interpretation to the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your heart. You, O king, were watching, and behold, this is the dream. Behold, a great image. This great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. This image's head was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed together and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found. And the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This is the dream. Now we will tell the interpretation of it before the king. I love the confidence of Daniel. He knew God answered his prayer. And he didn't go to the king and say, did I get it right? Does this sound pretty good to you? Does this sound close? No, he said, this is the dream. And I can only imagine the king sitting there and he's hearing this going. He's sitting there listening to Daniel and he's hearing, I'd be on the edge of my chair. That's what I dreamed. That's it. That's the dream. So now Daniel's got to give him the interpretation. Let's see what he says. Verse 37. You, O king, he's talking to King Nebuchadnezzar. This is Daniel speaking to King Nebuchadnezzar, interpreting the dream. You, O king, are a king of kings, for the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. So he's kind of telling the king a little bit, telling him that he's a powerful man. It doesn't hurt to schmooze the king a little bit, I guess. He says, and wherever the children of men dwell, or the beasts of the field and the birds of the heaven, he has given them into your hand and has made you ruler over them all. You are this head of gold. So I want you to notice, if you remember in verse 21, we read a verse that said, he removes kings and raises up kings. This is Daniel's prayer to God and thanks for giving him the dream. And here in verse 38, he's telling that king, you have been appointed by God. Isn't that what it says? It says, he has given them into your hand and has made you ruler over them all. That's what it says in verse 38. You are this head of gold. So remember that image. He saw a head of gold. Then he saw chests and arms of silver. Notice verse 38. But after you shall arise another kingdom inferior to yours. Then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything. And like iron that crushes, that kingdom will break in pieces and crush all the others. So this is interesting. He gives him all of this information. Let's review. I just want to make sure you get this. In Daniel chapter 2, verses 31 through 33, he says, it says there's a head of fine gold in chapter 2, verse 31. This is the dream he's interpreting. Then he says, the chests and arms were of silver. The belly and thighs were of bronze. The legs were of iron. The feet were of iron and clay. These metals are very important. So this is an artist's rendition. What you're seeing on the screen now in the PowerPoint is an artist's rendition of likely what King Nebuchadnezzar saw. This is the best, and I've seen this from many different Christian artists, and this is pretty well represented. It seems to be this is the general consensus of this is very likely the image that Nebuchadnezzar saw. So you notice the different metals. The head is of gold, that's Babylon. And then we have the chest and arms of silver, we have the belly of bronze, we have the legs of iron, and those feet are of iron and clay. Okay? So what we see here is a timeline. Because remember, he said, you are this head of gold. So think about it. Here's this wonderful king. He's the man, he thinks, and he's this head of gold, the most precious of all of the metals. The most precious of all the metals, and the one that's on top. And if you think about it, the head is the command center for all of the body. So he's a very powerful man in a very powerful and advanced kingdom. And then we have this prophecy in Daniel chapter 2, verses 34 and 35. We see the gold, the silver, the bronze, the iron, the clay. And then in verse 34 and 35, what happens? There's a stone that strikes the image, and it actually strikes the image in the feet. And what happens? It destroys the image. It becomes like chaff. Well, we're going to learn more about this image. But again, we're going to allow the Bible to tell us what this means. And this is just a prophetic timeline. It starts with the king of Babylon about 2,600 years ago, and it's going to take us through history. And this is very interesting. So let's go back to Daniel chapter 2, and I want to read it again. I want to pick it up in verse 37. You, O king, are a king of kings, for the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. And wherever the children of man dwell, or the beasts of the field and the birds of heaven, he has given them into your hand and has made you ruler over them all. You are this head of gold. So he's describing this image. But after you shall arise another kingdom inferior to yours, then a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, inasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything. And like the iron that crushes, that kingdom will break in pieces and crush all the others. Whereas you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, yet the strength of the iron shall be in it. Just as you saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay. And as the toes and feet were partly of iron and partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile. As you saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay, they will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. And in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Inasmuch as you saw that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold. The great God has made known to the king what will come to pass after this. The dream is certain, and its interpretation is sure. Daniel was confident. He just gave the king a view from the vantage point of where the king was sitting all the way through to to what we call the coming of Jesus Christ, the second coming of Jesus Christ. And you will see that as we go through this, especially as we go through this week. We're going to take a journey through this whole process. So let's review once again. Daniel chapter 2:38, he tells the king, you are this head of gold. That was Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar was the king of Babylon. He ruled from 605 to 539 BC. Remember, BC is the years move downward, okay? Now, there are books that will tell you that the head of gold is the European Economic Union, and this seems to be a growing and growing thing, but that is not true. It's not true whatsoever. Remember that this was written about 600 BC. Notice the following. This is a picture in Berlin of the Ishtar Gate. It's in the Pergamon Museum, and the Ishtar Gate was the 8th gate to the inner city of Babylon. And the lions that are on that gate, if you look at those lions, they actually represent Babylon. And Babylon was actually decorated to symbolize the gods Marduk, Adad, and the goddess Ishtar. This is called the Ishtar Gate. These are false gods. And this was one of the gates. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Babylon. So I actually made an outline here because there's so many details, and I tried to cut it down a little bit because I want this to go fairly quickly. So I'm just going to give you an artist's rendition of what Babylon, from the description that we have in the descriptions in history. It's in the form of a square. It was about 15 miles on each side, so it's about 60 miles long. The wall in some places were up to 300 feet high and up to 25 feet thick. This is around the city of Babylon. And the walls actually were built with another wall behind the first wall, about 75 feet behind, and the wall extended 35 feet below the ground because they didn't want anybody to be able to infiltrate the city. They not only went up about 300 feet, but they went into the ground 35 feet, not because they needed footers that deep, but to keep people from digging in and coming in and tunneling into the city. They went 35 feet down. It's just amazing. There were 250 guard towers around this city of 60 miles. 250 towers. Some of them were up to 450 feet high. 600 BC we're talking about. Think about this. There was a wide and deep moat that encircled the city, and the Euphrates River, which most of us have heard of the Euphrates River, flowed through the middle of the city. And there were ferry boats and about a half-mile-long bridge with drawbridges that closed at night. They would pull the bridges up so that nobody could come in at nighttime, so that they wouldn't be able to sneak in. They had hanging gardens in Babylon. It was very advanced. It was one of the wonders of the ancient world. And the water was raised from a river into the city by hydraulic pumps. They had indoor plumbing in 600 BC in Babylon. And in this country of the United States, where we are right now doing this series, we didn't have indoor plumbing until the late 1800s. Think about that. And Babylon had it 2,600 years ago. There were 8 massive gates that led to the inner city, the Ishtar Gate being one of them, and 100 brass gates. The streets were paved with stone slabs that were 3 feet square, and some people say that some of them were 3 feet cubed. Can you imagine? They wouldn't wear out too quick, would they, if they were that big? And then in Babylon, there were 53 temples, including the great temple of Marduk. And there were triads of deities. And again, this is where the false doctrine of the Trinity comes from these triads of deities that have been established from the time of the Tower of Babel. And think about it, Babylon, you see the correlation there? It's almost the same word. Babel is the root word of Babylon. Babylon means confusion. Babel is where the languages were confused. There were 180 altars to Ishtar. The golden image of Baal and the golden table both weighed over 50,000 pounds in solid gold. Not plated, solid gold. Babylon was called the Golden Empire. And if it was $850 per ounce, that's over $1.5 billion per table. That's pretty amazing. So there were over $200 billion in altars to Baal alone back then. Can you imagine that? We throw these numbers around today. Now they're in the trillions, like they're nothing. But $200 billion is tremendous. Nebuchadnezzar's palace was considered to be the most magnificent buildings ever erected on earth. That's what historians say. And in spite of all this, Daniel told him that there's going to be a kingdom that is lesser and inferior to you that's going to take all of this down. So imagine Nebuchadnezzar's thinking, wait a minute, I've had this dream. You're interpreting the dream. I believe what you're saying about the dream as far as what I dreamed, because I dreamed it. But I don't know. Think about that. A kingdom inferior to yours is going to take you down. What would go through your mind? Well, let's see what happened. Let's keep reviewing a little bit. Daniel 2:39, he says, another kingdom inferior to yours, and that kingdom was, if you look back in history, this is in the history books, was Medo-persia. They ruled from 539 to 331 BC. And just as the prophecy foretold, this is what happened. And the amazing thing is, if you look here, this is how they did it. Medo-persia was actually run by Cyrus the Great. He was actually one of the ones that had to do with this, and he actually was in charge of diverting the waters so that that river would go down and they would enter in. Remember, I said there were drawbridges. This is all history. You can look it up. You can find it in history books. And so what they did was they actually took this river and diverted it. They didn't have the excavation equipment like we have, as far as I know. I don't think they had earth movers like we do. But their soldiers diverted the waters, the river went down, and this picture is an artist's conception of them going in through the river and coming up and going through those doors. And in fact, this was prophesied that this was happening. Isaiah in chapters 44 and 45, if you look that up, you can read it, that the waters would dry up and the doors would be left open. This was prophesied. Cyrus was named 200 years before he was born to be the one to do this. So it's pretty amazing. Daniel went on to say in Daniel 2:39 on the PowerPoint, a third kingdom after Medo-Persia, there will be another kingdom of bronze. That kingdom is Greece. That's who that was. Am I going too fast, or is the pace okay? I just want to make sure I'm not going too quick. Everybody following? All right, good. So the third kingdom was Greece, the kingdom of bronze. And then we have Alexander the Great. He was the one who conquered the world by age 31, and he died at 32. He was a very young man. And some historians say that he died by some kind of a malaria, possibly from a mosquito bite, or, there's a number of different theories about what happened there. And this is what Arian Historical Library, book 17, chapter 12, has to say about Alexander the Great. He says, I am persuaded that there was no nation, city, nor people which his name did not reach. Talking about Alexander the Great of Greece. There seems to me to have been some divine hand presiding over his birth and actions. Remember what we read in Daniel? There's a God in heaven that sets up kings and removes kings. The king of Babylon was put there. He allowed the king of Babylon to take his people captive. He allowed these things to happen. He said Medo-Persia would come next. Medo-Persia came. He said Greece will come next. Greece came. This historian is saying it seems like God, there's a divine hand on this man to do the things that he did, to conquer as he conquered. Daniel chapter 2, verse 40, we have a fourth kingdom that shall be as strong as iron. And this kingdom is Rome. This kingdom is Rome. Have you ever heard of the iron monarchy of Rome? Some people will use that term. So when we look at this, Jesus was actually nailed to a Roman cross in 31 AD. Jesus was watched by Roman soldiers in 31 AD. Jerusalem was sacked by Roman armies in 70 AD. And Rome became one of the greatest empires of antiquity. And notice the comment from this historian, Edward Gibbon. He says, the images of gold, this is on the PowerPoint, the images of gold, silver, or brass that might serve to represent the nations and their kings were successfully broken by the iron monarchy of Rome. You notice he knows the metals that are in the image. Where do you think he got this information from? He must have been reading the Bible. Because he says right there, the images of gold, silver, or brass that might serve to represent the nations and their kings were broken by the iron monarchy of Rome. It's pretty amazing. So back to Daniel chapter 2 in our review. We see the head of fine gold, which is Babylon. We see the chest and arms of silver, which are Medo-persia. We see the belly and thighs of bronze, which were Greece. We see the legs of iron, which are Rome. And this is a timeline that takes us through history from the time of 600 BC through to the time of Rome. But it doesn't end there. This leads us to a question. Who conquered ancient Rome? Well, this is interesting. If you can see this map, it says on the slide there from Daniel 2:41, it says Rome was not conquered from without, but was divided from within. It doesn't say that in Daniel 2:41, but I added that note because this is what happened. If you look at Daniel chapter 2, verses 40 and 41, it says, the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything, and like iron that crushes, that kingdom will break in pieces and crush all the others. Whereas you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, and the kingdom shall be divided. Yet the strength of the iron shall be in it, just as you saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay. So it says the kingdom would be divided. That's what it says. And if we have divided Rome. In fact, I'm going to cover this again. I'm going to get to this. I just looked and I see it coming. So we have divided Rome from 476 AD to present. And this what's represented by the feet, partly of iron and partly of clay, along with the 10 toes of the image. Look at Daniel chapter 2, verses 42 and 43. And as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile. Every part of this image is here in Daniel. It's giving us the interpretation. As you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay, they will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. So we look here again. The head of fine gold, Babylon, Medo-persia, Greece, the belly and thighs, the legs of iron, Rome, the feet of iron and clay. What do we have? It's actually divided Rome. Rome begins to fracture. How many toes are on the feet? There are 10 toes on our feet, right? And so when we look at this map, these are invasions of the Roman Empire from 100 to about 500 AD or CE, depending on what you prefer. And here in this map, you'll see the invasion and fragmenting of Rome. And in the blue, I hope you can see that. Yeah, that's showing up pretty good on your screen. The blue lines, actually, we see the Vandals moving up from the north of Africa. The yellow is the Saxons moving down from England, and all these barbarian tribes begin to pick Rome at the seams. They begin to pick it apart until eventually it began to fall apart. And the kingdom was divided. And in fact, look at this next chart. This is what the kingdoms became. Remember, I said, how many toes are on the feet? We said 10. And if you look, you have the Alemanni, which are the Germans. You have the Burgundian, which are the Swiss. You have the Franks, which are the French. The Lombards are the Italians. The Saxons are the English. The Suevi are the Portuguese. The Visigoths are the Spanish. And then you have these 3 tribes which are now extinct, the Heruli, the Vandals, and the Ostrogoths. And all of these barbarian tribes are what we call today Europe. Think about that. The Germans, the Swiss, the French, Italians, English, Portuguese, Spanish. And how many kingdoms do we see? If you add them all up, including those 3 extinct ones, you have 10 kingdoms. The extinct kingdoms were actually the ones that wanted to keep teaching God's word. They wanted to stick to the word of God. There are certain doctrines that they would not accept that Rome was enforcing, and they became extinct because Rome actually went after them and killed them. This happened during the Dark Ages. So we see that Rome was divided and became Europe, and Rome is actually in Europe. It's over there. It's a very small province. We're going to talk more about that through this series. Does this make sense? You can see the 10 toes, you see the 10 kingdoms. We see the legs of iron, the iron monarchy of Rome. We're looking at history. And if you want these references, let me know. There's actually a handout which will have them in it. And you can get that. The references are in the handout. So that brings us to the next question. Have there been efforts to unite Rome? Well, yes. Charlemagne, Charles V of Spain, Louis the 14th? Is that what that is? Louis the 14th? That's what it looks like to me. Of France, Napoleon, and Hitler. And all of these were unsuccessful. So we move along here. Here we have a picture of, you notice the Tower of Babel, an artist's rendition of the Tower of Babel, which we find in the book of Genesis. And so what we see here in this what's the word I'm trying to say? In this drawing, I'll just call it, or this illustration, or this artist's rendition. This is from Flemish Renaissance painter Bruegel, and he painted this in the 16th century. And this is on the right side, you see the official poster of the European Economic Union in the years 1990 to about the early 2000s. This was their actual, on the right side of that image, that was their actual poster. That's what represented them. And this poster looks very similar to that Tower of Babel there, doesn't it? And that's what it's supposed to represent. It shows the Tower of Babel carrying the slogan, "Many tongues, one voice." You see that there on the bottom and the right? And in case the point was lost, the crane in the background was shown rebuilding that Tower of Babel. Remember what happened at the Tower of Babel? God confused the languages and they had to leave, right? They had to leave. And you can read that in Genesis 10 and 11 if you'd like to read that. And above this tower here that they're showing, you see the Euro stars. And they're actually inverted, which is a symbol of witchcraft, which is kind of interesting. So we have all of these things coming together at the central points downward. So think about this. It says, I put there in the slide, they shall not cleave one to another. Remember I said there are some people that try to tell you that certain parts of this prophecy are speaking about the European Economic Union. The Bible says it's not going to happen. The Bible is 100% correct. When the Bible says it, I believe it. The Tower of Babel, when they were building it, I'm sure they thought nothing was going to stop them. Everybody was speaking one language. And what happened? God confused the languages. They had to separate. And the tower stopped. They stopped it. So this is pretty amazing to me. So let's go back to Daniel chapter 2. Daniel chapter 2, we read this earlier, but we're going to read it one more time. Verse 43. As you saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay, they will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. God says they will not cleave one to another. So it will not happen. It will not happen. So let's do another review, very quick review. I hope you can see this. I tried to put all this on one slide years ago. I made this slide. So we have the head of gold. Number 2, we have the chest and arms of silver. The head of gold is Babylon. Number 2, the chest and arms of silver is Medo-persia. The belly and thighs of bronze are Greece. The legs of iron are Rome. The feet partly of iron and partly of clay are divided Rome. And then we have the stone breaking the statue and becoming a mountain. In Daniel 2:44, God said there would be Babylon, and there was Babylon. And then there would be Medo-persia, and there was Medo-persia. There would be Greece. There would be Rome. There would be divided Rome. All of these things are foretold. He did it at the time of the king of Babylon. The next thing to happen, friends, these things that we see have happened. The next thing to happen is the coming of God's kingdom. We're living deep in the time. We're in the feet. We're in these feet. Years ago, when I did a lecture very similar to this, somebody said, where are we in that timeline? If you were to describe it on that image, where do you think we are? And I said, we're in the toenails. That's what I told them. And I really believe that. So let's see how Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7 go together. We're already in Daniel 2. Let's look at chapter 7. And this is only 28 verses. I'm going to read the whole thing and listen to the language that's used here. Listen and we'll compare. And we're going to go back and review this very quickly after we read this. So here we go in Daniel chapter 7, beginning in verse 1. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, so this is a different king, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head while on his bed. So this is Daniel's dream. Then he wrote down the dream, telling the main facts. Daniel spoke, saying, I saw my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. And the four great beasts came up from among the sea, each different from the other. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I watched till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. And suddenly another beast, a second, like a bear. It was raised up on one side and had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And they said thus to it, Arise, devour much flesh. After this I looked, and there was another, like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. It was devouring and breaking in pieces and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots. And there in its horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words. I watched till thrones were put in place, and the Ancient of Days was seated. His garment was white as snow, and the hair on his head was like pure wool. His throne was a fiery flame, its wheels a burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from him. 1,000 thousands ministered to him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened. I watched then, because of the sound of the pompous words which the horn was speaking. I watched till the beast was slain, and its body destroyed and given to the burning flame. As for the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. Then to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away. His kingdom, the one which shall not be destroyed. Verse 15, I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit within my body, and the visions of my head troubled me. I came near to those who stood by me and asked him the truth of all this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. So you see the dream. Notice verse 17. Those great beasts which are 4 kings which will arise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. Then I wished to know the truth about the 4th beast, which was different from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, with its teeth of iron and its nails of bronze, which devoured broken pieces and trampled the residue with its feet. And the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn which came up, before which 3 fell, namely that horn which had eyes and a mouth which spoke pompous words, whose appearance was greater than his fellows. I was watching, and the same horn was making war against the saints and prevailing against them, until the Ancient of Days came and judgment was made in favor of the saints of the Most High. And the time came for the saints to possess the kingdom. Thus he said, the 4th beast shall be a 4th kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all other kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, trample and break it in pieces. 10 horns are 10 kings who shall arise from this kingdom, and another shall rise after them. He shall be different from the first ones and shall subdue 3 kings. I'm hoping some of this is sinking in. We're going to come back and review it. He shall speak pompous words against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High, and shall intend to change times and law. Then the saints shall be given into his hand for a time and times and half a time. But the court shall be seated, and they shall take away his dominion to consume and destroy it forever. Then the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people, the saints of the Most High. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. This is the end of the account. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts greatly troubled me, and my countenance changed, but I kept the matter in my heart. So let's go back to Daniel chapter 7, verse 3. It says here, 4 great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. So that brings up the question. Daniel sees 4 beasts coming up out of the sea. In prophecy, what does a beast represent? So here's where we're going to learn a little bit about how to understand prophecy. Daniel chapter 7, verse 17, what's it say? Those great beasts which are 4 kingdoms. That's what it says. Those great beasts which are 4 kingdoms are 4 kings which arise out of the earth. So beasts in Bible prophecy represent nations. Back on the PowerPoint, Daniel 7:23, it says, the 4th beast shall be a 4th kingdom on earth. So beasts in Bible prophecy represent nations or kingdoms. For example, the United States, we use an eagle. In France, they use the rooster. In Canada, they use, is this a beaver or is this, what do we call it? I guess that would be a beaver. And so again, when we read Daniel chapter 7, verse 3, we understand what that means. So in Bible prophecy, what does the sea represent? Because remember, Daniel 7:3, 4 great beasts, which we said are nations or kingdoms, came up from the sea. So what does the sea represent? Well, let's let the Bible interpret itself. If you look at Revelation 17:15, it says, the waters are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. So the sea in the Bible and Bible prophecy, the sea represents many people. It's really, when you start putting these things together, it becomes a little easier to understand, doesn't it? So the next question, what kingdom does the lion of Daniel chapter 7, verse 4 represent? Because we saw that, Daniel 7:4. It says the first was like a lion and it had eagle's wings. Well, let's take a look. Daniel chapter 7, verse 4, there it is. The image that Nebuchadnezzar dreamed about. Do you remember what that was? Would you like to guess what the lion represents? The first was like a lion. It had eagle's wings. So the first kingdom that was talked about in Daniel chapter 2 was Babylon. And it's also what this is speaking of when it's talking about the lion. And it's also portrayed as a lion in Jeremiah chapter 4, verse 7, Jeremiah chapter 50, verse 17, 50, verse 43, and 50, verse 44. So if you want proof texts to see that Babylon is the lion, you can look at those texts in Jeremiah. That's also, I believe that's also in the outline material I'll give you after the lecture. If you remember when we looked at the Ishtar Gate, it had lions on it. And if you could see a better picture, some of them have wings on them. So these lions on the gate, well, these have no wings on this gate. I'm sorry, on this gate. But we will see something here in a moment. That's what I'm thinking of. So this raises another question. What do the eagle's wings mean? In Daniel chapter 7, verse 4, the first was like a lion. We said we know that's Babylon. It had eagle's wings. What does that mean? Well, let's let the Bible interpret itself. In Deuteronomy 28, verse 49, the Lord will bring a nation against you as swift as the eagle flies. And then we have Jeremiah 4:13. His horses are swifter than eagles. So wings in Bible prophecy represent speed or quickness, or being swift, being fast about something. The next question. I know we're moving fast, friends. There's a lot of material to cover in these 6 lectures. What do the 4 winds of verse 2 represent? You notice in Daniel 7, verse 2, let's take a look. Oops, I'm sorry. I'll read it to you. Daniel spoke, saying, I saw in my vision in the night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. Okay? So in Jeremiah chapter 25, thus says Jehovah of hosts from the modern King James, a great whirlwind shall be raised up from the farthest parts of the earth, and the slain of Jehovah shall be from one end of the earth even to the other end of the earth. We continue in Revelation chapter 7. I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding the 4 winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the sea. So winds represent strife or trouble, times of trouble, strife. That's what it means. So when we see the wind stirring up, we see the sea in Bible prophecy. When we see these things in Bible prophecy, we can connect them to what this is talking about. The book of Revelation, the book of Daniel, very, very highly prophetic books. Next question. What kingdom does the bear represent in Daniel chapter 7? We read about this bear. So we had a lion first. And this lion had eagle's wings. And then now we're in verse 5 where it speaks about there was another beast, a second, like a bear coming up. What do they symbolize? Notice here, Daniel 7, verse 5. Suddenly there was another beast, a second like a bear. It was raised up on one side and had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. Well, this empire was made up of 2 groups of people. Remember we said Medo-persia was the second kingdom? So this was the Medes who came up first, represented by Daniel 5 by the bear coming up on one side. And then the Persians eventually became stronger, and that's represented in Daniel chapter 8:3 by the ram's second horn, which grew higher or taller. We're not going to cover Daniel chapter 8. I'm just giving you a little extra information. The 3 ribs that are in the mouth represent the nations that are overthrown by the bear. And so you see there, the bear's got the ribs in his mouth. The bear he's hunched up on one side, which shows an imbalance in power, Medo-Persia. Remember, Babylon, Medo-Persia. This is the second kingdom. And then here were the kingdoms. History proves that these 3 kingdoms were overthrown by the bear power, or the Medo-Persia power, or the chest and arms of silver that we see on the image. Egypt, Babylon, and Lydia. So when we look, the chest and arms of silver equal the bear, which is also Medo-Persia. So Daniel chapter 7 is sounding down what we saw in Daniel chapter 2. It's just the imagery is a little different. But the language is very similar when you see what happens in the succession that these things ran in. So next question. What kingdom does the leopard represent in Daniel chapter 7, verse 6? What do the heads and 4 wings represent? So let's look at the verse, Daniel 7:6. After this I looked, and there was another like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 wings, and dominion was given to it. Now, if you've remembered the image, you already know what the next successive kingdom was, but Greece is represented by a leopard with 4 wings and 4 heads. The 4 heads represent 4 kingdoms into which the empire of Alexander the Great was divided when he died at 32 years old. The 4 generals who headed these areas were Cassander, Lysimachus, Ptolemy, and Seleucus. Secular history, friends. You can look it up. This is a fact. So when we see in Daniel chapter 7 this 4-headed leopard with 4 wings, what do the 4 wings represent? What did wings represent in Bible prophecy? Swiftness, yes, speed. Remember we talked about how fast Alexander conquered the whole world. He did it by the time he was 31 years old. So the 4 wings are extreme speed, and it happened just as said. From the age 16 to 31, he conquered the whole then known world, and he died at 32 years old. So here we have Greece, which is the belly of bronze, and the 4-headed leopard with 4 wings. Same imagery that we see in Daniel chapter 2. We see it just expressed differently by Daniel in Daniel chapter 7. This was a dream that was given to Daniel. In Nebuchadnezzar's dream, what was the next thing that came after the bronze? It was the legs of iron. And what kingdom was called the Iron Monarchy? It was Rome. So what kingdom is represented by the fourth beast of Daniel chapter 7, verse 7? Well, let's look at the verse. A fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. There's a hint. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I want you to notice very quickly, the head of gold, the most precious metal. The Babylonian Empire was called the Golden Empire. King Nebuchadnezzar was a very powerful man, and his kingdom was very, very wealthy. And then silver is less valuable than gold, isn't it? But it's also a little stronger than gold. And then bronze is less valuable than silver, but it's also a little stronger than silver. And then what do we have? We have iron legs. Well, iron is extremely strong, but it's not worth near what gold or silver are worth. So we see those kingdoms in succession, less worth. They're moving down the image, but they become stronger as they go on. So if you remember the wording of Daniel chapter 2, verse 40, it says, "And the fourth kingdom," on the PowerPoint, "shall be strong as iron, inasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything. And like iron that crushes, that kingdom will break in pieces and crush all the others." So let's compare the language as we go back to Daniel chapter 7, verse 7. "And a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns." So who is this empire? It has to be the Roman Empire. So we see the iron denotes strength. But notice we also have 10 horns. So the next question, what do horns symbolize in Bible prophecy? Well, 10 horns are 10 kings, is what it tells us in Daniel chapter 7:24. It gives us the interpretation. The 10 horns are 10 kings. Remember, we looked at this slide a little bit ago. This was once Rome, and it became divided Rome, as we saw on the map earlier. So the 10 horns are the same as the 10 toes, which Nebuchadnezzar saw in the image in his dream. So in Daniel 7:7, the Roman Empire, the fourth world kingdom, is represented by this horrible or nondescript beast with teeth of iron and with 10 horns. And this is an artist's rendition. Babylon, Medo-persia, and Greece were described by animals that we're familiar with, like a lion, a bear, and a leopard. But this beast was like nothing that we've ever seen before. It's described as having a likeness, not like any animal that's described on the earth. And that's why we call it a nondescript beast, because it doesn't represent something that we're familiar with. Nothing like this had ever happened in history, the things that are even happening now. So let's do a brief review, just a brief review. We have here's the image that Nebuchadnezzar saw in his dream, very likely. We have the head of gold, which is Babylon, the chest and arms of silver, which are Medo-persia, the belly of bronze, which is Greece. We have the legs of iron, which are Rome. We have the feet of iron and clay, which is divided Rome. And you can see all of that represented. I tried to put it all in one slide so you could get a picture. And here it is. This is the image he saw, representing each metal representing a particular kingdom. So what do we have? I'm lining them up for you. The head of gold is the lion with wings. That's Babylon from 605 to 539 BC. The chest and arms of silver is Medo-persia. It's the bear from 539 to 331 BC. The legs, or the belly of bronze, is Greece, the four-headed leopard with four wings. The conquest was very quick with Alexander the Great, and that went from 331 to 168 BC. Remember, there were four generals that took over, and that's what the four heads represent. And then we have this nondescript beast of Rome, which started about 168 BC through 476 AD. Now, we're not done talking about Rome in this series. This is just laying the foundation for the rest of the week. But we see here that God uses beasts to identify nations. And we've learned so far that on the image that Nebuchadnezzar dreamed about, each section of the image, each one of these metals or kingdoms is represented also by a beast in Daniel chapter 7. And we're going to be covering more of this as the week goes on. And then, of course, here at the bottom, we have divided nations. And then we see from 476 through to the end of time. In that prophecy, nations, we said beasts represent nations, wind represents strife, the sea represents people. This is all in Bible prophecy. The wings represent speed, the horns represent kings or kingdoms. And so Daniel was interpreting that dream for Nebuchadnezzar, which was giving him a timeline from that point to the end of time to prepare God's people for what would be coming. That's really what this is all about, this timeline. So again, I know I keep saying it because these things don't stick sometimes. Daniel 2, 31 through 33, the head of fine gold. He said, you are the head of gold, and after you shall come another kingdom, inferior to yours. That was the Medo-persia. And then after that, a third kingdom, like a leopard or bronze. That was Greece. And then we have the legs of iron and the feet of iron and clay. So there's still prophecies we need to discover. This is just a foundation to get us through the next couple of nights, because tomorrow night and Wednesday night are going to be really in depth. And so what happens next in the prophecy of Daniel chapter 7? What's going to happen next? Well, you'll have to come back tomorrow night to find out. It's really exciting. Tomorrow night, we're going to discuss this. It's a very controversial topic, and a lot of people misunderstand this, and this is why it's so important that we know and see what the Bible actually says. Antichrist and the beast of Revelation.